Daniel Westcott has it all: power, wealth, and absolute control over his life. But on an ordinary afternoon, an unexpected message turns his world upside down. Evelyn, the woman he hasn't seen in 5 years, reappears with a mysterious and urgent request. Following the clues, Daniel uncovers secrets that will challenge him in ways he never imagined. In a journey marked by tension, reconnect, and difficult choices, he finds himself faced with something money can't buy: a second chance. The meeting was at its peak, with charts projected on the wall and voices echoing through the room like the gears of a perfectly tuned machine. But for Daniel Westcott, the sound was drowned out by the buzz of the phone on his desk. He ignored it. He always ignored it. When the second vibration came, he finally glanced at the device. The name Evelyn lit up on the screen. He froze. Evelyn. There was no reason for her to reach out, not after 5 years of absolute silence. He opened the message. "I need a favor. I have no other choice. Please send me £200 to handle something urgent." Daniel frowned. Evelyn had never asked for anything, not even during the tumultuous end of their marriage. She had left without complaint, without shouting, without demanding more than the prearranged settlement. And now, this message, direct, almost desperate. He quickly typed a reply. "What's going on?" The response came immediately. "Please, just send the money. It's important." The request seemed absurd. He knew he had left Evelyn financially secure. The divorce settlement had been more than generous. So why £200? And why was she asking him, of all people? The meeting carried on without him. Daniel walked out without explanation, a habit no one dared question. In the car, he contacted one of his people. It didn't take long to gather information. Evelyn was living in Brixton, in a small, modest apartment. There were no signs of extravagant spending or obvious issues. Her life seemed ordinary, almost banal. It was strange to imagine Evelyn, who had once been so vibrant, living like this. When he arrived at the address, Daniel didn't hesitate. He climbed the narrow stairs of the building and knocked on the door. Evelyn took a while to answer. When she did, her face carried a bitter surprise, as though she had always known this moment would come but had prayed to delay it. "Daniel." Her voice was dry. "Evelyn," he replied, glancing into the apartment. It was simple, with worn furniture and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. He noticed toys scattered across the floor before she could block his view. "What are you doing here?" She crossed her arms, defensive. "You asked for help. I'm here." He held up his phone. "What's going on?" "Nothing you need to worry about." Evelyn tried to close the door, but he wedged his foot in the gap. "No. You're not sending me a message like that and then pretending I don't exist. What's going on?" The silence was broken by light footsteps in the hallway. Before Evelyn could stop it, a child appeared in the doorway of the living room. Daniel blinked, stunned. It was a boy with messy brown hair and large, bright eyes. He held a red toy car in his hands and looked at Daniel with curiosity, but without fear. "Who's he, Mom?" The voice was small but carried unexpected firmness. Evelyn sighed, defeated. "Henry, go to your room." The boy hesitated, glancing between Daniel and his mother. Then, with a shrug, he turned and walked away, still holding the car. When Daniel turned his gaze back to Evelyn, the question was written all over his face before he could even voice it. "Is he my son?" Evelyn said nothing. Her expression hardened, but there was something in her eyes, something Daniel didn't recognize, that disarmed him. "This isn't your business, Daniel." Her voice trembled, but she kept it firm. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. "It is. It's exactly my business. Is he my son?" Evelyn pressed her lips together, glancing away for a second before meeting his eyes again. "Yes. He's your son." The words hit him like a wave. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't know what to say. Evelyn seized the silence to continue. "But this doesn't change anything. You weren't part of his life before, and you won't be now." That snapped him out of his stupor. "You decided that on your own? You decided I didn't have the right to know?" "Yes." Evelyn didn't flinch. "And I would do it again." Daniel stared at her, his hands trembling with restrained anger. He wasn't a man who lost control, but this revelation was beyond anything he could ignore. "This doesn't end here." His voice was low and firm. Evelyn crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're expecting, Daniel. But Henry doesn't need you. He already has everything he needs." Daniel opened his mouth to reply but realized it would be useless. He turned and left, descending the steps quickly. As he got into his car, he felt a mix of indignation and curiosity gnawing at him. Evelyn had lied. She had hidden something enormous. But why? As he drove home, one thing was certain: he would find out. The silence in Daniel's office was nearly absolute, broken only by the occasional click of his mouse as he reviewed the reports he'd ordered on Evelyn. He had paid a high price for the investigation, but the truth was that no information in the world could answer the one question that really mattered. Why did she hide this from me? The photos showed Evelyn walking Henry to school, buying groceries at a local market, reading a book at a cafe. Her expressions were serene, but the simplicity of her life unsettled him deeply. Evelyn, who had always been so brilliant, so full of life, now seemed resigned. But it wasn't her resignation that kept him up at night. It was the emptiness he felt, a strange guilt that grew with every new image of the boy who undeniably carried traces of himself. It didn't take long to uncover something Evelyn had never wanted him to know. During the divorce, while she was hiding her pregnancy, a specific incident had sealed her decision not to tell him anything. 5 years ago. Daniel vaguely remembered the meeting. One of his managers had made a critical error, and, in his characteristic style of zero tolerance for failure, Daniel had humiliated the man in front of everyone. It wasn't an outburst but a cold, methodical, calculated reprimand. The word Evelyn had used back then to describe his behavior echoed in his mind: despicable. That night, she had tried to talk to him, but he hadn't paid attention. He was more focused on the next round of investments. And now, everything made sense. Evelyn hadn't wanted Henry to grow up under the same unbearable pressure, where someone's worth was measured solely by success. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. But what about my side of the story? And my right to know, he thought. It didn't matter. He needed to confront her about this. When Evelyn opened the door, her tired expression was immediately replaced by frustration. "You again? We need to talk." He stepped inside before she could stop him, his determination clearly etched on his face. "You can't just barge into my house whenever you feel like it, Daniel. Why did you hide Henry from me?" he asked directly, ignoring her protest. "Don't give me vague excuses. I want the truth." She crossed her arms and stared at him. "I've already told you. You wouldn't have been a good father. And who decided that?" "You." "Based on what?" He stepped closer. "Because I worked hard? Because I cared about my career? Does that make me unfit?" "No." Her voice was low but firm. "But what you did over the years made it clear that your values didn't align with mine. You humiliated people, Daniel. You turned everything into transactions and power plays." He hesitated, recalling the incident he'd discovered. "You were there when I yelled at that manager. Is that what this is about?" She blinked, surprised. "You remember that? I didn't until now. Was that why you hid Henry from me?" Evelyn was silent for a moment. Finally, she sighed and sat on the arm of the couch, her shoulders slumping. "It wasn't just that. It was what it represented. I was pregnant at the time, and I thought, is this what I want for my child? For him to grow up thinking he has to be perfect all the time? That his father's love depends on success or failure." Her words hit him like a blow, but he didn't interrupt. "You were always brilliant, Daniel. Intelligent, ambitious. But you never made room for anything that wasn't those things. And I knew that if I told you about Henry, he'd become just another part of your control. I wouldn't have done that." His voice faltered slightly. Evelyn looked at him, as if trying to gauge whether he truly believed what he was saying. "Maybe. But at the time, I couldn't take the risk." The silence stretched for several seconds until Daniel finally broke the tension. "Don't you think he deserves to have a father?" She sighed. exhausted. I don't know, Daniel. Maybe. But I needed time to make sure he had what you never gave me. Stability, security, unconditional love. He sat down, the weight of her words settling over him. Evelyn wasn't speaking with resentment, but with an honesty he wasn't used to confronting. Do you think I can't change? Evelyn hesitated but finally answered. I think you're trying. But that's not enough for me. It's him you need to prove it to. Daniel nodded slowly. Then that's what I'll do. Evelyn didn't respond, but she looked at him with something he couldn't quite recognize, hope mixed with caution. He knew the road ahead would be long. But for the first time, he felt he was willing to walk it. It was a grey day, typical of London, with dense clouds threatening rain. Evelyn was at home, staring out the window as Henry played with his toy airplanes on the floor. It was a scene that usually brought her comfort, but that morning, she couldn't relax. Daniel was too late to be trusted and too early to give up. The sound of a car pulling up on the street interrupted her thoughts. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Mom, is it the friend? Henry asked, his bright eyes looking up. Evelyn sighed, smoothing her hair with her fingers before opening the door. Daniel stood outside, holding something covered by a blue top. Their eyes met, and for a moment, he hesitated. That wasn't like him. What is that? Evelyn asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. He glanced at the covered object, taking a deep breath before answering. It's for Henry. Daniel, Evelyn began, but he raised a hand, asking her to wait. Just hear me out. She narrowed her eyes but stepped aside, letting him in. Henry ran to the door, curious, his eyes lighting up when he saw Daniel. Did you bring me a plane? Henry asked, pointing at the top. Daniel smiled, a gesture that now seemed almost natural. Not exactly, but I think you'll like it. He knelt down and began pulling the top away. When he finished, it revealed a toy airplane that looked like it came straight out of a movie. It was big, detailed, with wings that moved and even blinking lights. Henry froze for a moment, his eyes wide, before letting out a cry of joy. Is it mine? It's all yours, Daniel said as the boy ran to touch the toy, carefully examining every detail. Daniel, Evelyn started again, but he interrupted her. I didn't buy it. He looked at her, anticipating her objection. I built it myself. I spent days assembling every piece, reading manuals. I even got help from an engineer friend to install the lights. Evelyn stayed silent, watching the scene. Henry was kneeling on the floor, testing the airplane's wings, completely enthralled. Daniel turned to her, his tone softer than she was used to. I know what this looks like. Like I'm trying to buy something. But this isn't about the airplane. It's about him knowing I care. That I want to be here, not just as someone who drops in occasionally, but as someone who's part of his life. You've never done anything like this before, Evelyn murmured, more to herself than to him. Daniel shrugged, his eyes fixed on the boy. I've never had anyone worth doing it for. Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. There was something disarming about the honesty in his voice. For the first time, she saw something different in Daniel. This wasn't just a calculated effort, it was genuine. Henry broke into her thoughts, tugging at her hand. Look, Mom. He made an airport too. The boy pointed to the set of pieces beside the airplane. Evelyn smiled, but her eyes stayed on Daniel. He didn't say anything else, but what he had done spoke louder than any words could. Finally, she took a deep breath and made a decision. Do you want to be part of his life? She asked, her voice firm. More than anything. She looked at Henry, who was now playing with the airplane, laughing in a way she hadn't seen him do before. Then she turned back to Daniel. Then you're going to start as a father. And as someone who's going to have to earn my trust too. Daniel's eyes shone, but he simply nodded. Thank you, Evelyn. She hesitated, then gave a faint smile. Don't thank me yet. Just don't let me down. And in that moment, as Henry ran around the room with the airplane in his hands, Daniel realized this was his chance to change. Not just for Henry, but for himself. And, perhaps, for something that could still be rebuilt between him and Evelyn. It was a sunny day in London, the rare kind that seemed to light up every corner of the city. In Brixton Park, the sound of children playing blended with the distant hum of urban life. Daniel sat on a bench, watching Henry run across the grass with his toy airplane. He was smiling, but not like before, the cold, calculated smile he wore in meetings. This one was genuine, light, as if something within him had finally settled. "Dad, look!" Henry shouted, holding the airplane up for Daniel to see. Daniel waved back, laughing. He still wasn't used to hearing the word "dad" from the boy's mouth, but now it felt right. Natural. Evelyn sat beside him, an open book resting on her lap, though she wasn't reading. Her eyes were fixed on Henry, the smile on her face carrying a kind of relief Daniel had never seen before. "You look more at ease," she commented, without taking her eyes off their son. "I think I am," Daniel replied, his voice low. "I never thought this would be possible, to be honest." She turned her face to him, studying him for a moment. Daniel had changed. Not just for Henry, but for himself. He now made time for simple things, for moments like this. "You got what you wanted," she said, though her tone lacked the sharpness it once carried. "Not exactly." He looked at her, the smile fading slightly. "What I wanted was for you to trust me." Evelyn was silent, flipping the page of her book without reading it. "I'm still learning," she admitted. "But you're on the right track." It was the closest thing to an "I trust you" he could hope for, and in that moment, it was enough. Henry came running back, holding the airplane, one of the wings now slightly worn. "Can I fly it again tomorrow, Dad?" he asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Tomorrow, the day after, and every day you want," Daniel said, ruffling the boy's hair. Evelyn laughed, something light and brief, but it made Daniel realize how rare and special that sound had become. As Henry returned to the grass, Daniel looked at Evelyn again, as though he wanted to say something but hesitated. "What is it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I just wanted to say thank you. For not giving up on me." Evelyn looked at him for a moment, then closed her book and stood up. "I'm just trying to do what's best for him," she said, glancing at Henry. Then, after a pause, she added, "And maybe for us too." Daniel nodded, watching as she walked over to Henry to help him with the airplane. The sun shone on her hair, and he realized that, for the first time in a long while, he felt something he couldn't quite describe. It was simple, perhaps, but profound. A new chance. A new family. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it.